Hi, good evening. Welcome to this Alpine Property live webinar series. We've got some experts in the French property transaction this evening to talk you through all things related to buying property in the Alps, to answer all of your questions. We've had quite a few submitted beforehand. I'll be taking live questions throughout. So what I'm going to do is go through each of our panel just to give a brief introduction before we get into all those questions that we've been asked to answer. So I'm going to start with Dennelle Nizoux from Renestance in France, with all things sort of residency and connected important issues if you're looking to relocate to France. So over to you, Dennelle, for your introduction. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jonathan, for the invitation and also for allowing me to demystify a little bit French residency and French visas. I'm originally from California, and I've been dreaming of living in France since the age of 13. Finally got my chance in 2000 when my American employer transferred me to Paris. And then after 10 years of Parisian weather, our Franco-American family moved down to Montpellier, where I am here today. It's a university town in the south of France. We were just discussing with the other panelists the lovely weather we've been having. In 2015, I launched Renestance, basically to help other English speakers realize their French lifestyle dream. We were helping North Americans, Australians, and other non-EU English speakers several years before Brexit. So, at the time, our British clients were, it was much easier for them to move over to France with an EU passport. But there's no reason to panic. We've been helping non-EU nationals move to France, for many years. We can also help with finding housing or other administrative setup that you need to start your French lifestyle, including joining the healthcare regime or exchanging your driving license, setting up a sole trader business, all sorts of admin goodies we can help you out with.
Perfect, that's excellent. Thank you very much, Dennelle. So on to Fiona Watts, Managing Founding Director for IPF Finance. Over to you, Fiona, for your introduction. Thank you.
Many thanks, Jonathan. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. So I set up International Private Finance 15 years ago, and we specialise in arranging finance for our clients who are looking to purchase a property in France. Most of our clients haven't ever done that before. They perhaps don't speak French, or they're not familiar with the buying process in France, and certainly not aware of the differences between the markets in terms of lending. Most of our clients are British and they are resident in the UK, but saying that, we still help a large number of clients that perhaps are American or different nationalities based all over the world. Most of our clients are buying a second holiday home, but there are clients that are also moving to France and buying a main residence, and we can help there as well. In terms of the mortgage market, similar to the UK, interest rates have of course risen across Europe, and so interest rates are much higher than they have been. And the mortgage market works very differently to perhaps our British clients are used to, and even those in the US as well. So we're really here to talk them through the process, explain how the affordability works and the different mortgage products are available, and we help them liaise with all of the different parties involved in the transaction as well.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Fiona. And last but by no means least, Gareth, who may be a familiar name to anyone engaging with Alpine Property, one of their leading lights, looking after new inquiries and people looking for overseas properties. So over to you, Gareth. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I've worked with Alpine Property pretty much since the beginning, so about 23 years now. I'm one of a team of about 18. We cover the whole of the Haute-Savoie, so that's the area which is about an hour's drive, no more than an hour and a half's drive from Geneva Airport, and we specialise in selling property in the ski areas, the station. Yeah, looking forward to answering some questions.
That's perfect. Thank you very much, Gareth. And myself, I'm Jonathan Watson. I'm Associate Director here at LUMON. So we're a French property currency specialist, an international payments provider. We've got real expertise at dealing with transactions in and out of France, not just for the actual purchase, but also any associated costs beyond. So with these webinars, what we like to do is just try and get a bit more information from our audience. So you should now see some questions on your board on the screen. It's just really helpful for us to get a bit more information for you in terms of when do you plan on starting to look at France. As I'm sure some of you are aware, it doesn't happen overnight buying an overseas property. You know, you don't just push a button and magically you're top of the ski slope the next morning. So timelines are very important, and certainly with the type of information we want to be sharing with you tonight, it's just helpful for us to get a bit of an idea on timelines. It has all sorts of an impact on the sort of information we can provide. So thank you very much for responding. A second poll I'd just like to launch there in terms of the time period with finances. Obviously, in terms of the currency side of things, which is what I'll be talking about this evening, that's another really important part. There's lots of different options that we can provide versus the banks in terms of the time scales. If you're using the banks, you're really set to buy currency on certain days, and if you've got to wait 3 months to buy your currency, that can be quite problematic. The currency markets can move many percentage points in that time, and you could find yourself on the wrong side of it. So thank you very much for everyone who's replied to that particular poll. And our last one, before I hand over to my experts with their questions, we will be looking just to get a bit more information from you there. So that's great. So that's all been launched now. What I'm going to do is pass over to, I think we'll go firstly to Gareth, obviously to look at some of the questions you've all got. And just before I go to Gareth, so you have got a questions box there, all our viewers tonight. So please do put forward your questions. If there's something we talk about, you'd like a bit more information on it, do feel free to put a question in. Just a warning, we may not get through everything tonight. That's quite common. You couldn't fit everything into 1 hour, all the potential ins and outs of buying an overseas property in France, but we should be covering a lot of the main points. And of course, you'll have everyone's details afterwards, so I can explore it all in a bit more detail. Right, that's enough from me. Gareth, let's look at you. I've got a question here from Catherine. She said she's looking for a property at an altitude not more than a 2-hour drive from the airport. What would you recommend there, Gareth, in terms of the approach?
Well, did she mention an altitude, or did she just say at altitude?
It's just a property at altitude, no specific meters there above sea level.
Yes, okay. So within 2 hours of Geneva Airport really is our area. It's the Haute-Savoie. You'll struggle to get further south to the Savoie in that time. So if we're just looking in the Haute-Savoie, you're looking at places like Chamonix, Morzine, Léger, Châtel, Saint-Ouen, La Clusaz, Le Carreau, Saint-Gervais, places like that. They're all actually a bit less than 2 hours, probably a maximum of 1 hour and 15, 1 hour and 20. Now, if you want to go to a high altitude area, you'd have to think about one of two places, Aboria or Flen. Though they are a bit particular. If you went to those two places, you'd really be limited to just buying an apartment, and quite often it would be like a leaseback apartment. So that's not really our specialty. We normally the things we sell are normally chalets, and they're in places that are around about 1,000 meters. So that's the altitude. Now, if the question was, I'm looking for somewhere snowshore, that would be slightly different. I might say Chamonix is snowshore. Although it's only at 1,000 meters, it has access to high altitude skiing. And also places like Morzine and Châtel, they have access to Avoria, which has got high altitude skiing. Same with Samoa, access to Flen, and Le Carreau, access to Flen. So really, you've got a lot of options.
Fantastic, Gareth. Okay, yeah, lots of options there. Well worth speaking to Gareth, perhaps in a bit more detail to find exactly where might suit you best. Fiona, we've got some mortgage questions coming in. How easy, this is Gareth, he's asked, how easy is it to obtain a French mortgage given I'm self-employed? Just getting 2 years accounts, budget about £300,000 and a deposit of around 100,000. Now, I'm just going to tag on to that. I know there's been some questions already about amounts that are able to be borrowed. So perhaps you could tag something on there, I think, covering those points.
Absolutely. Okay. So in terms of minimum loan amounts, the banks in France tend to not lend much less than 100,000 euros. So I'd say sort of 100,000 euros, you'd be able to get something from that level fairly comfortably. In terms of being self-employed, you need to have 3 years worth of company accounts and personal tax returns, and they will take an average. So if you've just started the business, what we often find is people's income isn't quite so great at the beginning when they're setting things up. So they'll take an average of your salary and your dividends for the last 3 years. They won't take any other form of income that you draw, such as a director's loan. So it has to be salary and dividends for the last 3 years, and they'll take an average. If it's been very jumpy, they won't take an average, they'll take the lowest figure. So generally, I would say for someone that's self-employed, you want to be established a few years so that you've got that good track record behind you, and make sure your tax returns are up to date. So for example, that you filed the latest set that perhaps on, the deadline isn't until January 2024, but you can get ahead and file those so we have another year's worth. That's well worth doing.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Fiona. Okay, let's go over to Dennelle. We've got Jonathan Hughes here who's asked, please explain how one acquires a long-term visa, he's put in brackets retirement, without becoming tax resident. So long-term visa without becoming a tax resident. I think you may be on mute there, Dennelle.
There. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, very clearly. Thank you, Dennelle.
Okay. Can you also see me? I had an internet cut, so
coming through crystal clear. Thank you.
Okay, great, thanks. Right, so that's a common question that we get, and I guess I would like to start off by saying that when we speak about residency, there's actually 2 different types of residency. So Jonathan was right to make the distinction. There's immigration residency, which basically gives you the right to live or work in France, and then there's fiscal residency, which basically means you're required to file an income tax return in France. So you can have a long stay, visa or residency permit in France, but not necessarily be a fiscal resident of France. And really, the litmus test for whether you're a fiscal resident, there's a few different items. Basically, if you satisfy one of the conditions, then you are considered a fiscal resident, which means you have to declare your global income on a French income tax. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to pay any additional income tax, because if whatever your income is taxed at the source, you've already paid, say your retirement income tax is paid in the UK. All you do is declare that to the French fiscal authorities. You don't have to necessarily pay tax on it again. But anyway, the litmus test for determining whether you are required to file your income tax return in France is, first of all, how long you've been in the country. If you've been in France on the ground for more than 183 days in the calendar year, so from January 1st to December 31st, then you will be considered a fiscal resident. Or if you have spent more time in France than in any other country. So we have a lot of retirees who like to follow the sun and travel around the world. If you spend most of your time in France, then you're going to be considered a fiscal resident. And basically any condition that shows that that's really your main primary residence is in France. I mean, that's where your income's coming from, or that's where your main family homestead is, then you will be considered a fiscal resident, and you'll be a tax resident basically. But you can get out of that by having a residency permit and just not staying for, staying less than 6 months.
Okay, thank you, Dennelle. I hope that answers your question. Yeah, there's a regular one we get, and it's important to get it right, of course. Gareth, let's just go back to you. We had a question come in. We do see this one a lot as well. What costs are added on to the purchase price when purchasing in France? And he's put in brackets, government tax, etc. Oh, Gareth, I think you might be on mute there. Apologies.
Thank you.
There we go. Thank you.
Yes, they're summed up, these costs, in the phrase notaires fees, which the notaires hate because it's not all notaires fees. But if you're buying an existing property, you can budget on 7 or 8% on top of the purchase price. And if you're buying a new build, then it's more like 2.5%. And those fees are split between the notaire and also what British people would know as stamp duty, so government taxes. So that's why the notaires don't like them being called notaires fees.
Perfect. Okay, thank you very much, Gareth. So on to myself. We've had a question here about money. Why should I use LUMON over the high street banks? So anyone who's new to the idea of a currency broker, one of the principal reasons for using a currency broker is a better exchange rate. So LUMON can actually demonstrate savings against the banks in terms of the typical rates we're offering versus what the high street banks might be offering. We do like a mystery shopper every so often just to check these rates, and we're demonstrating savings of around 1 to 2 cents. Now, sometimes it's more, it just depends what the bank might be offering, but that amount on a larger amount of money can easily be thousands once you're talking about anything upwards of sort of, £100,000 or so. Of course, some Alpine properties can go into the millions. So yes, we can demonstrate savings against the banks. That's one of the key reasons to use a currency broker. Naturally, you want to get a better rate of exchange. It's going to help you save money, but it's really to do as well with our service. So once you're registered, and that is the first step in dealing with a foreign exchange broker, you register for free, then you're able to purchase currency and hold it in a wallet. Now, I was mentioning before about timelines. With the purchase of a French property, it's really a good sort of 3 months from start to finish. Now, if you were to use the high street bank for those payments, you're going to pay a deposit once a compromis de vente is signed, and then you're going to pay a balance about 3 months later. So the deposit, obviously that has to happen quite quickly anyway. The balance, if you have to wait 3 months to buy your currency, it's very difficult to know exactly where the rates are going to be. So with this wallet that LUMON give you access to immediately, as soon as you're registered, you can actually purchase euros and then hold them there until they need to be converted. So it's a really good way of helping to manage your costs so that you can lock in an exchange rate very early on in the process, and it avoids you suddenly getting a surprise and finding, oh, the rates dropped and all of a sudden my property has become much more expensive. So those are really the key sort of differences in terms of an ability to offer better rates than the banks, and also to help with the actual timing of an exchange. You can also use the wallet that we have to pay the notaire direct, and as my panelists will surely attest, it's much easier to get us to send the euros direct to your notaire. You just send us an email. If you have to open a French bank account, and we'll talk more about that later, to make a payment from a French bank to a notaire, there could be all sorts of extra costs and charges. You might have to book an appointment with the French bank. They may only be open on certain days of the week. It may not be straightforward. So we can send the money much more easily to wherever it needs to go. Right, let's go back to our fellow panelists. Dennelle, we've got one here. Does a residency permit allow access to the EU Schengen area over the current 90 and 180-day restrictions for a UK resident?
So I guess, assuming that if you have a residency permit in France, can you then spend longer than 90 days in the rest of the Schengen area? I guess, did I understand the question? Yes, I mean, but I think as soon as if you want to spend longer than 3 months in any country, you do need to apply for residency in that country. I've seen some other question about somebody had a residency permit for Portugal and wondering if then they could live in France as a resident. But each residency permit is country specific, so I'm not sure if that answered the question.
Okay, that's good. Might be good for the questioner to get in touch with you potentially direct
Absolutely, sure.
at the end for a bit more on that, or do keep those questions coming in, viewers. Fiona, let's go to you. I mean, I think we covered this a little bit earlier, but it's asking about just a very basic question: can UK nationals obtain French mortgages?
Yes, absolutely. That's what we do every day of the week. So yes, UK nationals can obtain French mortgages. They would tend to be a Euro mortgage. One of the things people ask is, who is it they'd get a mortgage through? So generally it'd be a French bank, it would be a Euro mortgage, and it would be secured against the new French property that you're looking to purchase.
Excellent. Okay, that's brilliant. Gareth, let's go over to you. We've got a question really about sustainability with the property, asking about if the French government can help subsidise things, how to make your label E property more sustainable. Are you able to give us an answer there, please?
Yes, it's become a massive question. The labels have been around now for quite some years, but really in the last couple of years, it's people really care about them, and that's for a couple of reasons. One, if your property is worse than an E, so if it's an F or a G, and you want to rent it out, that could become a problem. And if you then want to sell it in the future, currently, if it's an F or a G, you have to get a further investigation for someone to look at your property and tell you what you need to do to bring it under F or G, to make it an E. So if your property is an E, generally people are happy because they don't have the more onerous problems. But if they want to make it better than an E, they need to look at the diagnostic report, and on that report will be suggestions on how to improve things. So if you had an oil-fired central heating system, one of the suggestions would be for you to install a heat pump central heating system, for instance. That's one of the easiest, though not cheapest, things to do. One of the cheapest things to do is to add more insulation to your roof, but that's normally already been done. So now people are adding insulation to the walls, be that on the inside or the outside. But then there are the obvious things like using double glazing, installing photovoltaics, solar panels on your roof, and that sort of thing. In fact, I'm about to have my house diagnosed next week to find out, just out of interest, because I'll write a blog about this, where it is. I'm assuming it's probably going to be an F. So then I'll pay for the further investigation, and I'll put it all on the blog so people can see the process. The other part of the question, which was about whether or not the government will help, the answer is yes, but it depends on your income. The lower your income, the more the government will help. So I'll write about that again on my blog, because there's various associations that will help you find the answer. There you go.
There we go. I hope that's answered the question. Sounds like keeping an eye on Gareth's blog is well worth it if you're looking at buying property in France or living over there. Fiona, let's go back to you. We've got a question about a new build property and buying a property through a company. Would that change things at all in terms of the financing arrangements?
So the most common companies that people use to purchase property in France are two French company structures. One's called an SCI and one's called a salle de famille. Both of those are fairly common. You need to be shareholders of the company as individuals rather than any corporate structure from the UK. And then in terms of mortgage options, some banks are more comfortable lending to that structure and some aren't. So if you're looking to purchase a new build property and you're wanting to set up a company to own it in, it will simply limit the banks that we would be able to approach and the products that you can access, but not significantly. You'd still have plenty of choice.
Perfect. Okay, and just to put that sort of onto you as well, Gareth, I think it's worth getting perhaps your perspective there of buying as a business, you know, perhaps as a limited company or setting up a property in the name of an SCI. Any other sort of important considerations for our viewers that they need to be thinking about?
Very much that they should talk to a local accountant, a French accountant, because the number of different scenarios involved are huge, and there can be some fairly significant tax implications which they need to know about before they start. It does happen, but it's fairly rare, but we can point you in the right direction to speak to a suitably qualified accountant.
Fantastic. Okay, so just go back to Dennelle. Working remotely, obviously this has been a big thing, hasn't it, in recent years with COVID and just sort of general lifestyle changes for people, you know, the digital nomad, etc. Where do you stand on moving to France and working remotely?
We just talked about that today in our little coffee morning with the local expats. It comes up very often, and again, there's the difference between fiscal residency and immigration residency. You can there is no digital nomad visa right now for France. So first of all, that doesn't exist. But you can get a visitor visa, which you can have a long stay visitor visa, which can convert into a residency permit. And visitor really just means that you're not working. It doesn't mean that you're traveling or whatever. And the consulates or embassies will give you a visitor visa even if you've got remote income. So say you're working for a company in the UK, but you'll be physically sitting in France. You can do that immigration wise with a long stay visitor visa. The issue becomes later in terms of taxes, and not even income taxes, but more of the social charges, because even if you declare that that revenue that's really coming from your company in the UK on your French tax return, that's fine, but the social charges that are run by the URSSAF, they will eventually say, hey, wait a minute, you were sitting and working in France. They don't care about the immigration aspect of it, but they do care about getting their social charges. So that's usually where things get sticky.
Perfect. Okay, thank you very much. Just go back to Gareth. Quite a technical question here, but might be useful. Often people looking to renovate properties. We've had a question come in from Alex. For properties which need renovation, I understand an architect needs to be involved for renovations over 150 meters squared. Can you tell us a little bit more about that in terms of any barn renovations, or I think he's getting at whether external buildings, whether that regulation, if tell us more about the regulation itself, but whether it applies to external as well as your main residence.
Well, it doesn't matter if it's a first or second residence. The rules are the same, the planning rules. He's right. For properties over 150 square meters, you do need an architect, but it depends what you're doing. So if you're talking about like a barn renovation, so you're making habitable space and you're adding windows and that sort of thing, then yeah, you need full planning permission. But if you're not changing the outside of the building at all, then sometimes you need a lower permission called a declaration, in which case you wouldn't need an architect. But basically, for a house that if you're creating a new house, you'll need to go through an architect to apply for the planning permission. and you'll need to conform with all the local regulations, which are fairly easy to come across. If you go to the local mairie, they will ask you where the property is, which zone it's in, and they will give you a sheet with all the local regulations. So if you stick with those, you'll probably make progress as you hoped, which shouldn't be a big surprise.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Gareth. This is a really interesting question, but certainly worth looking at. And I guess probably comes down to some sort of insurance. But it's Marianne. She says, "Look, my question might be a little paranoid, but it's important to me, and I'm sure it would be." Talking about natural disasters, the risk of flood, mudslides, avalanches, should the worst happen, where do I stand in terms of getting insurance, and what's the best way to cover that concern when buying an Alpine property? And I'll put that to the panelists. Gareth, perhaps you're in a strong position to answer it, but interesting to get everyone's views.
Yeah, I'm happy to go first on that. Look, pretty much every property in the Alps is subject to some sort of natural disaster, whether or that and that sounds quite scary, but we all know what the dangers are, because when you buy a property, it has to be made clear to you. And so, for instance, my house is at risk of flooding, landslide. It's not at risk of avalanche, and we're all at risk from earthquake. But it's no problem for getting insurance. We even sell properties which are in what's known as red zones, which a property, for instance, you might not be able to renovate it or extend it or make it larger because of the risk is so great. But we still sell them, and you can still get insurance for them. You might want to ask the insurance company first in that extreme situation. We've occasionally had properties that have been in red zones and then have been condemned by the council, so they've been bought off the council, so no one can live in them because it's feared that they're too dangerous. But that's very, very rare, and yeah, it's not a problem with insurance when you've been told you have to move out.
Excellent. Okay, anyone else got anything to add there? That seemed like a good answer.
Yeah, I can just add from, oh, sorry, Dennelle.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, from a mortgage perspective, the bank will insist that the building has insurance. They won't lend against it otherwise. So you'll have to show you have insurance at the time of completion to the notaire, and make sure that the property is properly insured.
Yeah, I was just going to add that I think a good rule of thumb, no matter what type of insurance you're looking at, is to really make sure that you understand what is covered, and partner with English-speaking visa insurance experts. And I think it really is worthwhile to take the time up front to really make sure you understand what risks are covered.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, panelists. I guess buying that dream home in the Alps, by the nature of where it is, there's going to be these things happening, but well worth it to wake up and hit those slopes early in the morning and enjoy the life. Fiona, let's go back to finance. Sort of two questions here, so you might want to tackle them separately. How is affordability calculated in France, and what level of deposit will I need?
Okay, so in terms of, let's start with the deposit. In terms of the deposit, as a general rule of thumb, you're going to need a minimum of 15%. So I'd say 20% is more common. And then you've got to add on those completion costs that Gareth mentioned earlier, so the 7.5% to 8% for an existing property, and the lower sort of 2 to 3 for a new build. So you need to make sure you've got those in terms of a deposit. And one of the things I do want to mention about that is, in the UK, it's very common for people to borrow that money be gifted it from a parent, all different sort of manner of ways of getting it. As long as you have it, it's fine here. In France, that's not the case. If you're gifted the money or you borrow the money, on the whole, you'd struggle to get a French mortgage. The banks in France want to see that you've saved that money up, and they don't want you essentially to have 100% borrowing, i.e. you borrowed 20% in the UK and 80% in France. So you do need to be careful about the source of your deposit, and I'd always say to someone, please ask me, so that, you know, come to us, speak to us, and sort of let us know what the source of the deposit is, and we can let you know if that is going to cause problems. So it's more complicated than just making sure you have enough. You also need to bear in mind the banks want to see you've got some money left over as well. They want to make sure that this purchase isn't going to completely use all of your savings and you'll have nothing left over. That's what they saw during COVID. People defaulted and asked for payment holidays very quickly. They've become very anxious about that. So that's the first part. And the second one, in terms of affordability, it works differently to what we're used to here in the UK. So their general rule of thumb is what they call a debt to income ratio. So no more than a third of your income can be taken up servicing your existing debts and the new French mortgage. So if we take the example of someone earning £3,000 a month, £1,000 has to cover their UK mortgage payment, any car loans or leases, any personal loans, as well as the cost of a new French mortgage. So for some people, that's significantly more restrictive than it is in terms of the UK and the way that we use income multiples. So the cost of your UK mortgage and whether or not that's about to jump up if you're coming to the end of a fixed rate is really critical in determining how much you'll be able to borrow, as is cars on finance, balances on credit cards, but not your everyday living expenses like we're used to declaring here in the UK. Those are considered what you can use your 2/3 on. So the 1/3 has to be on contractual debt, so anything that you've got a loan agreement for, and the other 2/3 are for your general living expenses. And that's their basic rule of thumb that every bank has to adhere to.
Perfect. Okay, hope that answers your question. I've had a question come in, a common one. I think I get asked this almost every day. How do LUMON know the best time for clients to transfer their money? Well, the short answer is we don't. No one can say on this planet exactly when the absolute best time to make a currency transaction is, and that's simply because no one knows. The currency markets are just a reaction to what is happening in the world. I've done the job 14 years and I've never known anyone who can totally predict the future and totally guess what the market will do. Having said that, we can use market insights and our experience of tracking the market to really help you come up with a plan and a strategy. What we do at LUMON is we've got a very big research team here. We specialize in not just private transactions, but also business transactions, looking at all sorts of forecasting methods. We actually consult about 50 different banks to get their sort of up-to-date research and analysis. So this is, say, very high-level foreign exchange research. You won't find this in the back of a newspaper or from a Google search. You know, some of the research teams at some of these banks, whether you love them or loathe them, you know, they've got these huge research teams dedicating time to looking at the markets. So we compile all of this data together, and then we can really just give you a snapshot of where the markets could be headed. And there's normally a fair bit of truth in what is suggested when we look at and track the outcomes. To give you an idea on this, on pound euro levels, the range of forecasts are expected to go up to almost 119, almost 120 towards the next 6 months, but potentially as low as just below 110. So as I often say to clients, look, these so-called experts, they don't get it totally right. You know, how confident are you that you know what's going to happen? So this just goes back to the options that I was discussing earlier about this wallet. So what we will do is we will look at your individual situation and try and understand things. If you're on a very tight budget and you can't really, to be honest, afford for the market to drop too much more, then it's probably going to make sense for you to buy your currency sooner than later, a more sort of defensive strategy, so you know your costs up front. Like I mentioned earlier, the last thing you want to find is it gets to completion date and you've got to find thousands of pounds more just to buy that same amount of euros. Now, if you want to take a more speculative strategy, again, that's totally fine. We will work with you to understand what sort of rates maybe you're targeting, any particular information that's coming out in the FX markets that could be beneficial, and we'll share all of this news with you to give you some sort of strategy and timelines of where the rates could be headed, and then we'll just track that very, very closely for you and try our best to help and support you to get those levels. We can't tell you, as I say, with exactly what the market will do, but we can update you on the forecast, and then hopefully we can buy the currency for you at a rate that you're ultimately going to be happy with. So yes, if you are considering any larger payments, very important to speak to a specialist about exactly what's going on in the market, and then you've got those options there to actually buy the currency, so you're not all just leaving it to chance. So I hope that's answered the question. Just going to a question we've had referring to this, going back to Fiona. When Fiona referred to 1/3 of income, should this cover finance costs? Is that 1/3 of income after tax? Just going back to your last answer there, Fiona.
Okay, so it depends on the bank, which is why I didn't specify. So some banks will take gross income minus NI, and others will take net income minus NI and all tax. So it really varies from bank to bank. And they'll also take a different level of other levels of income as well. So for example, bonuses may be discounted, rental income may be discounted, which is why unfortunately you haven't got much choice but to contact someone like us and go through your specific situation. The 1/3 rule is to try and simplify it for people so people can just get a general feel for it, but each bank does apply different rules. I hope that answers the question.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. It was good to get the live questions as we go through. Gareth, let's go back to you. Perhaps this is a property investor. They're asking what the rising star is going to be. You know, what are the new hot property places in the Alps to buy? You know, where could this potential client buy and hope to perhaps make a few quid or euros on the investment in the future?
Well, a bit like your response, Jonathan, if we knew that, we'd all be buying there, wouldn't we? What I would say is since COVID, we've seen people move out of the ski resorts. So they're looking for space and privacy. So whereas it was all about how close are we to the ski area, how close are we on the bus route, and that sort of thing. That still does figure strongly, but now there's a lot more people who are saying, well, actually, I'm happy to be 10 minutes away from the skiing in somewhere quieter, because I know I can drive to the skiing or get on the bus to the skiing. So it's places like where I live, actually, Saint-Jean-d'Eau, which is 10 minutes away from the big name resort of Morzine. The prices have been very, very strong here since COVID because of that. And I don't know, I don't think I'd ever have guessed that. I think I would have said always buy in the center of the ski villages. But that's how it's changed. But what's going to happen in the future, I don't know. So yeah, there you go.
Okay, fantastic. Hope that answers the question. Well, might be say to all of you really. It's David Williams. He's asked, what is the latest news on the hike of tax to be charged for UK holiday second homeowners in France? What's the latest news there? Anyone?
Well, I'm still off mute, so that is quite a big question at the moment, and it's not got nothing to do with UK second homeowners. It's to do with everybody, and that includes French second homeowners. It's a big political issue in France, it's an issue in the UK as well, in the holiday areas. Probably not quite so big politically. But they're making moves here to increase the local taxes to try and invest the money into local housing, but also to try and make people think twice about whether or not a second home is the right thing for them. So the government, the central government, has said that these taxes can go up between 5% and 60%. And at the moment, my local taxes are going up by 20%. So that's quite a hike on its own. So we'll wait and see. Some of the councils have said they won't be hiking the local taxes by 60%, but I think some of them have. Mostly around us, there's not going to be a knee-jerk reaction. But yeah, it's all to do with the difficulty people that live in these areas and people that want to come and work in these areas are finding housing. So it's one of the levers the government can use to try and balance things out.
It's also, I think,
anything, yeah.
So just going to add, yeah, it's definitely due to that, and also because under Macron they abolished the occupancy tax and the taxe d'habitation on primary residences. So that, I mean, that was a huge source of income for the municipalities, and now they're trying to find, try to compensate for that loss. Another thing that they're doing that they didn't do so much before is the tax on empty lodging. So we've got some clients with second homes in this area, and you can't just leave it empty. I mean, if you're not going to stay in it and you're not renting it out or letting it out, then now there's also a tax for that. So I mean, the housing crunch is making the municipalities creative in terms of tax collection.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, everyone. Well, look, Dennelle, let's just stay with you. We've got a question here from Kirsty. If I have an Irish passport, can my husband and children who do not stay longer than 3 months?
Absolutely. Well, so if you're moving to France with your non-Irish family, your non-EU family, in the first 3 months of arrival, you take an appointment with the préfecture, and then your spouse would get a special a residency permit based on a carte de séjour for a member of an EU family, basically, and that residency permit will allow your spouse to work, and basically that residency permit is the same as the EU spouse's rights, so they can do whatever the EU spouse can do. The children don't need a residency permit for minors. That's not necessary, but but for ease of travel, they do have this a document called a DCEM that they can also get from the préfecture. That's actually pretty easy to do, but they won't need, none of them will need a visa, and only the spouse will need the residency permit.
Okay, perfect. Gareth, just to you on the purchase process again. In France, do you have the same house purchase chains? Does it operate in the same way as the UK, or are there any time limits before, say, completing on a purchase after making an offer? I'm assuming this is someone, in the UK selling their primary residence, trying to buy in France. If the sale's not completed, I guess in the UK, sometimes these things go on. How's that going to impact their completion in France?
Sales chains do exist in France, but they're much rarer. I think in the UK they're almost the norm, whereas here, especially with second homes that are being sold, it's much rarer. But there's flexibility on the actual sale date. So if there are problems, the sale date can be moved with the notaire and both parties agreeing. Yeah, if something falls apart in the chain, it doesn't break everything instantly. There are opportunities for flexibility. Has Fiona got anything to say on chains?
Yeah, I was just thinking it's very different to the UK in terms of that, because it's a much more linear process and everyone's very clear on what their deadlines are and how it's going to play out. So as Gareth said, often it's a matter of the date changing rather than it falling apart. So if someone was selling a property in the UK and perhaps that was going to be part of their deposit, their mortgage would be dependent on the sale. So everything then would be backing up to that. So once they had sold their property in the UK, then they could have their mortgage offer and then they would complete. So they would get an approval subject to the sale of their UK property. So what people need to consider is you can't do both on the same day. So if you're planning to sell a property in the UK and move completely to France, you need to have worked out where you're going to stay in that interim period, because the two transactions can't take place on the same day if you're dependent on that money for the mortgage to go through. If you're a cash buyer, it's a little bit different. But if you're using a French mortgage, you'd need to sell the property in the UK first and probably allow 6 weeks in between the sale of your UK property and the purchase of a French one. But we help clients manage that time scale. And as Gareth said, I don't know of a purchase in my 20 years of doing this that has fallen apart because of a chain in France. It just doesn't happen. It's the dates that are moved.
Okay, thank you both. That's some good answers there, and I'd certainly add to that. In terms of a chain where a client's selling a property in the UK and then they're completing in the UK and needing to move quickly to France, what LUMON can actually do with that, we can actually take funds from a UK solicitor and then we can actually do a same-day payment to France. So this is going to be a much quicker way to get your money from the UK to France for your completion. You can actually schedule those dates to be very close to each other. I think, of course, what Fiona's talking there is about using the UK sale and then getting the mortgage once you've got the money to obviously prove you've got those funds. What I'm talking about perhaps is where you're paying in cash for the property using the balance of a UK property sale. So we can take receipt of funds direct from your solicitor, the full amount, and then pay to your notaire in France with the funds there the next day. Now, if you were to actually try and do that through the banks, picture it, you've just packed up your house in the UK. Solicitor's going to pay your house funds to your UK bank account to move a large amount of money. Let's just say it's £500,000. Very rare that you can actually deal it over the phone with your bank. You may have some accounts. Typically, the client is actually going to have to go into the bank to organise that payment to the currency company. Now, I've had plenty of calls where I've had a client in France completing on their property that week and they're trying to move a large six-figure sum of money and they're now in France and their UK bank wants them to travel back to the UK to actually go into the branch to try and organise the payment. So well worth looking at some of these sort of payment systems before you're getting to these stages, because you get a limit often with a bank account of how much you can move per day. If you're trying to move £500,000 to France and you're stuck, in the middle of France, only doing £10,000 a day on your little iPad in the middle of nowhere, waiting to complete, you're going to have a pretty upset notaire and vendor. So again, well worth the chat with us, currency specialists, just to work out the actual payment side of things for these transactions. So good stuff. Let's go over to Gareth, just talking about investment properties here. Just a bit of an overview perhaps of some of the taxes that could be involved.
Okay, so when you say investment property, I assume that's a property you're going to rent out. So if you're renting a property out, you're getting an income from it, and that needs declaring. Whether or not you are a private individual or you've set up some sort of structure, some sort of company. In fact, there are some very basic companies you can set up in France to deal with this, but it needs declaring, and it depends on how you're set up. So the companies that people in the UK understand are like limited companies, so they might offset the income against the expenses. So quite often you can show not an enormous profit, so not a whole lot of tax to pay. But you'll find the cost in that situation is in paying the accountant to submit the accounts. Whereas in France there are some much more basic structures which makes the submission much easier. So you can do it yourself, but you'll end up paying more tax on the income. But it's a very complicated subject. The most basic way of mitigating paying tax on your income is by classifying your property. So by getting it a star rating, for instance. So if you go through that procedure, which isn't complicated, this is something the French government has instituted to try and improve the level of quality of the rentals in France, because the holiday income is so important for the French economy. Classify your property, you'll get a huge reduction in the tax you have to pay, and it's well worthwhile.
Okay, brilliant. So just coming to the last 5 minutes, I've got lots of questions. Just to say to everyone, if we've not answered your question, you will be able to contact all the panelists individually for a proper chat that's not rushed, where you can ask more and more questions. So apologies if we've not got to your question. I said that may well be the case. Got another topical one. We're getting quite deep here, and I think it's good. We've got to ask some probing questions. So I guess this is to all the panelists. Gareth, will probably start with you. What is your view with global warming and less snow in the winter? Last Christmas in December, there was some worse periods of snow. What's the sort of outlook there, and how in terms of selling property in the Alps, how are we responding to that?
When I came out here in 1999, a friend of mine said, what on earth are you doing going to the Alps? Haven't you heard of global warming? And in fact, I'd done my degree in fuel and energy engineering, so I was at the heart of the problem. I started off in the oil industry, so I came out here because I love the mountains. It wasn't all about skiing, and that seems to be what's happening. People are less and less focused on just coming out here for skiing. If there is good skiing, they're very, very happy, but they're willing to enjoy the mountains for everything else they can offer. So many more people are starting to appreciate the summers in the Alps. And in fact, the summer is one of my favorite times. So we're out here walking, mountain biking, road biking, swimming in the lakes, yeah, when there's snow, and in general, we over the last 23 years we haven't had many disaster seasons, one or two. We go skiing, but I think that's how it is. It's going to be, you love the mountains for everything they can offer you, not just the skiing. And on that subject as well, there's a lot of political pressure from the people in France to reduce the impact of holidays, particularly skiing, on the environment. So non-lift access skiing is a much bigger thing than it used to be. Trains to get to the Alps are a much bigger thing than they used to be. So yeah, it's something we're all thinking about. And I'm not saying we're not worried about it, but the mountains will always be there, whatever happens.
I think that's a fantastic answer, and yes, of course, these places have got so much to offer, and you look at the value that the property holds there. And I guess if it was for some reason a bad season in one area, you can always travel somewhere else to get some skiing. So thank you, Dennelle.
As somebody who's living along the Mediterranean here, I think as sea levels rise with global warming, that the Alps will be a good place to go.
Very good.
People have traditionally, so the people that live in Lyon have traditionally had to put up with some pretty hot summers, and traditionally they all leave and they go to their second homes in the Alps. And so we're just finding that trend even stronger. So people who live down in the valleys, they're coming up here to spend their summers.
Fantastic. Okay, I'm just going to get a quick one into Dennelle. I'm sorry, it's sort of just come in. I think it should be a quick answer. We've only got a couple of minutes left. I think this is sort of touched on something you mentioned before. We talked about the Irish person who had obviously an EU passport. We've got another question. Do I still need a visa if I'm joining my family in France? So I guess this would be someone without an EU passport. Would that change things if they're going out there?
It depends on what the family's situation is. I mean, if it's a French family, if it's we have a lot of British clients who did manage to get a work card. They were here before the cutoff dates, and they are able to. You're able to join your family in France if they're in that situation. For example, we had some clients who were able to bring over their mother. I think you need to show that the relationship predates Brexit or predates the cutoff period, and that also it's easier if the person is if you're dependent upon the family that's in France. But yes, I mean there is a visa needed, but it's doable.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I'm very sad to say we've come to the full hour, but I've really enjoyed tonight, and I think we've had some fantastic questions and some really, really good answers from our panelists. A good snapshot of all the information you're going to need if you're looking at purchasing a property in the Alps. So just going to go through our panelists once more, just for them to give you a little outro, a little taster of their insight and experience. So Dennelle, we'll say goodbye to you.
Yes, well, welcome to anybody who's got questions about making the move over, or even any other administrative bits. If you're just coming to spend some time, we can help you unsnaggle those tangles.
Thank
you, Dennelle. And yourself, Fiona, please.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's been really interesting and great to have the questions from everybody. So just really to say, as I've hopefully highlighted, things are fairly specific. So if people have questions that they'd like, do contact us. We'd be more than happy to go through your individual circumstances and explain what the options are.
Fantastic. And Gareth, a little taster from yourself, please.
I just want to say thank you very much to everybody. I've learned a whole load of stuff, especially from Dennelle. It's a new subject for us, really. So thank you very much. And to anybody who wants to ask us questions, you can just respond by email. We're at the end of the email, and then we'll get back to you. So looking forward to hearing from anybody.
Yeah, thank you, and goodbye from myself. You'll be able to contact me or any of our panelists. You'll get all of their contact details, so I'd be delighted to hear from you further. We've touched on a lot, haven't we? We've done politics, climate change, all these important topical things, but we are going to be doing these in the future. So a big thank you from myself, big thank you to all our panelists, and thank you to our audience for participating. Have a great evening, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.